What if I told you that one of the biggest Azure migration mistakes happens before the migration even starts? Most organizations spend months discussing migration tools. They compare platforms, they compare services and costs. They even build project plans and hold workshops. And then they ask the wrong question. The wrong question is, how do we move everything to Azure? The right question is, what should we move? When should we move it? And should we even move it at all? Because successful Azure migrations are not about moving the most workloads. They're actually about making the right decisions. Over the last few episodes, we've helped our client establish a cloud strategy. Right, we've built their landing zone, we've designed their identity architecture, we've even created their network foundation, and in the last episode, we established that security model. Right now, we're ready for the stage that many organizations fear the most. Migration. And in this episode, I'm going to show you how consultants approach Azure migration planning, how to avoid those sort of common mistakes, and again, how AI is going to help accelerate migration assessments without replacing that human judgment. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact framework I use when helping customers prepare for those Azure migration projects. More importantly, you'll know why migration planning is often more important than the migration execution itself. So let's get started. Whenever organizations think about migration, they usually picture technology, things like servers, database and applications, network and storage. But migration is rarely a technical problem. Migration is usually a business problem, right? It's wrapped in that technology because every application supports a business process. Every server supports a user. Every database supports a team, and every workload has people depending on it. This is why Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework treats migration as part of a larger sort of cloud adoption journey, rather than simply a technical activity. Cloud adoption starts with strategy, right? Planning, things like readiness and governance. Let's not forget security and operational considerations before workloads are moved. A migration project succeeds when the business continues to operate successfully. That's the real definition of success. And that means consultants need to think beyond technology. Let's go back to where we left our sort of client. Right. They have around 500 users. They've got that aging data center we know about and those critical business applications. They want to expand to new regions and geographies as well. And they've got a relatively small IT team and a massive desire to modernize their infrastructure. At first glance, it's tempting to say, let's just move everything. But that approach often creates unnecessary risk. One of the first things I explain to customers is this: the cloud is not a destination. It's actually an operating model. That means that every workload automatically belongs in Azure. Some applications they should be retired, some should be modernized, and some should actually remain where they are temporarily. And some workloads are actually perfect candidates for migration. Our job as consultants is figuring out which is which. Before I actually begin discussing migration tools themselves, things like timelines or even migration waves, I ask a very, very simple question. What are we actually trying to achieve? That might sound familiar because it's the same question we asked during discovery. And that's intentional. Good architecture always starts with business outcomes. Remember, the goal is reducing data center costs, right? Remember, the goal is improving resiliency. Maybe the goal is security or maybe agility, right? Or maybe we just want to support growth. The answer matters because it influences every migration decision we actually make. A migration strategy designed for cost reduction looks very, very different from a migration strategy that's designed for modernization. The business objectives become the mission. Everything else just supports that mission. One of the biggest misconceptions about cloud migration is that migration equals moving servers. It doesn't, right? Imagine moving house. You wouldn't pack every item you own without first deciding what to keep, right? What to throw away and what to actually replace. Cloud migration works the same way. Many environments contain legacy applications, things like unused systems, a lot of the time duplicated services as well, and a lot of technical debt. Things like forgotten infrastructure, right? Migration provides an opportunity to evaluate everything. One of the most valuable outcomes of migration planning isn't discovering what should be moved. It's actually discovering what shouldn't be. The realization alone can save organizations significant time, money, and effort. Once we understand the current environment, we can start thinking about migration approaches. And this is where many organizations, if I'm honest, they get a bit overwhelmed because there isn't just one migration strategy, right? There are multiple options. Sometimes the best choice is to move a workload largely unchanged. Sometimes the best choice is to modernize it. Sometimes the best choice is just really replacing it entirely with a SaaS solution. The important lesson here is that migration decisions should be made workload by workload, not through like a blanket assumption. I actually often tell customers, don't ask how you'll migrate the environment. Ask how you'll migrate each business capability. That small change creates much better decisions because now we're actually focused on outcomes rather than infrastructure. One of the first migration exercises I run involved identifying critical workloads, right? Not all applications carry equal risk. Not all systems have that equal business value, and not all workloads deserve equal attention. It's just, again, just facts. For our client, let's imagine they have a file service, file services, they have identity services, like collaboration platforms. They have a manufacturing system and ERP applications. The ERP platform is likely more critical than a development server nobody's touched for like 3 months. That means migration planning should reflect that reality. Biggest mistake migration teams make is treating everything equally. Good consultants prioritize, right? Great consultants prioritize based on business impact because resources are limited, right? Especially with our client, we know they've got a small IT team. Time is limited, budget, is limited, and attention is limited. Prioritization is one of the most valuable things a consultant can provide. Imagine moving an entire city at once. It'd be absolute chaos. Now imagine moving one neighborhood at a time. Much easier. Migration programs work the same way, right? Consultants often think in terms of migration waves, right? A wave is simply a group of workloads that move together. The goal is reducing risk. Smaller migration waves create opportunities to learn. They create opportunities to refine the process, and they create opportunities to fix problems before larger migrations occur. One of the biggest advantages of cloud adoption is that it doesn't need to all happen at once. Slow and deliberate often beats fast and chaotic, especially when critical business services are involved. Many executives ask that same question. How quickly can we migrate? It's a fair question, don't get me wrong, but it's usually not the most important question. A better question is, how safely can we migrate? Because migration speed is meaningless if the business experiences massive disruption. I've seen organizations create aggressive migration timelines that look great in presentations. Then reality arrives. Application have dependencies, teams have limited capacity, testing takes much longer than expected, and then unexpected issues always appear. Suddenly, that timeline becomes the enemy, right? The role of a consultant is to balance that ambition with reality, right? Moving fast is useful. Moving safely is essential. Technology gets most of the attention during migrations, but people often determine success. Think about what changes during cloud adoption, right? Things like process, responsibility changes, right? Operational models obviously change. The support procedures change as well. And there's a skills requirement change. That's a lot of change for one single organization. One thing I always remind customers is this: technology adoption is relatively easy. Behavior adoption is much harder. Migration planning should include people, not just platforms. Training matters, right? Communication, knowledge transfer, all matters because eventually that migration project ends. And the internal team becomes responsible for operating what remains. If you're finding value in this sort of Azure Consultant Playbook series, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to know your answer to this question. What's the biggest migration challenge you've experienced? Right? Was it technical complexity? Maybe business resistance, right? Was it skill shortages or even application dependencies? Maybe unrealistic timelines. Let me know in the comments below because every migration project teaches lessons and those lessons can help the entire community. Now, let's jump into this episode's Consultant Copilot Corner. This is where AI becomes incredibly interesting, right? Migration projects generate huge amounts of information, right? We have application inventories, we have server inventories, we have just things like dependency maps, assessment reports, and those business and technical requirements as well. Not to mention the risk register. Traditionally, consultants spend enormous amounts of time processing this information. Today, AI can dramatically accelerate that process. Now you've collected migration assessment data for our client, right? Hundreds of sort of workloads, multiple business units, various dependencies. Rather than manually reviewing every line individually, we can use Microsoft Copilot to identify patterns. We can ask it, group applications by migration complexity, identify potential risks, highlight application dependencies, suggest migration waves, categorize workloads by business criticality. That is incredibly valuable. But here's the key: AI doesn't own the migration strategy, the consultant does. Right? For example, AI might recommend migrating two applications together because they share technical dependencies. But the consultant may know that one application's business owner is unavailable during that period, or that a regulatory project has sort of already reserved key resources, or that the business event introduces unacceptable risk. That's why I view AI as a force multiplier, right? It accelerates analysis, accelerates documentation and planning, but the consultant still applies the context, that sort of experience and judgment. The best migration outcomes happen when expertise and AI work together, not when one replaces the other. At this stage in the project, success isn't measured by migrated servers or workload counts. Success is measured by confidence. We know what should move, right? We know when it should move, and we know the risks, right? And we know the priorities, right? And that sort of migration sequence. Most importantly, we know why we're making those decisions, right? The migration strategy now supports the business strategy. That's exactly where we want to be. Because successful cloud adoption is never about technology alone. It's about helping the business move forward. Now that we've built our migration strategy, another major question emerges. How do we make sure Azure remains cost effective after workloads arrive? Because, one of the fastest ways to lose executive support is uncontrolled cloud spending. That's why in episode 7, we're going to explore Azure cost management and FinOps. We'll look at how consultants approach cloud economics, cost optimization, governance, forecasting, and the decisions that help organizations control spending without slowing innovation. And of course, we'll use AI to help identify optimization opportunities in the Consultant Copilot Corner. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss episode 7 of the Azure Consultant Playbook AI Edition. If you know someone currently planning a migration project, share this video with them. Before you go, answer this question in the comments. If you were migrating to Azure tomorrow, what would be your biggest concern? I generally love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, the goal of migration isn't to move everything, right? The goal is to move the right things at the right time for the right reasons.